The truth behind the Star of Bethlehem. What historians don't tell you. Everyone knows the story. A magical star appears in the sky. Wise men follow it. They find a baby in Bethlehem. But what if everything you were told about that star was wrong? What if the truth is hidden in ancient political propaganda, cosmic alignments, and historical erasure? And what if, just maybe, this wasn't a star at all, but something far more mysterious? The Gospel's puzzle piece. Here's what they won't tell you in Sunday school. The Star of Bethlehem appears only in the Gospel of Matthew, nowhere else. Not in Mark, not in Luke, not in John. And Matthew was written at least 50 years after Jesus' death. But, in order to get the clear vision about this Gospel, let's analyze it in details. The story of the Star of Bethlehem appears only in the book of Matthew. The Gospel tells us that a bright star appeared in the eastern sky when Jesus was born, famously seen by a group of wise men. These biblical magi, sometimes called kings, now adorn nativity scenes around the world. The three wise men, or magi, arrived after Jesus' birth carrying gold, frankincense and myrrh, as captured in this Byzantine mosaic created in 565 AD. Wikimedia Commons. The Bible describes how these three wise men saw the new star as a sign of the birth of the King of the Jews, so they set out for Jerusalem to worship him. Once they arrive, they inquire about baby Jesus with Herod, the region's ruler appointed by Rome. "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage," Matthew tells us. But Herod is worried by the idea. He and his own wise men supposedly seek to discover Jesus' birthplace. Eventually, they call on the three wise men to ask when the star appeared. And thanks to Micah's prophecy, prophet in the Bible, that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, Herod sends the trio to Bethlehem to search for Jesus. Supposedly, Herod also ultimately kills the infants of Bethlehem in an attempt to snuff out Jesus. According to Matthew, when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star, which they saw in the east, went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with great joy. Evidence for the Star of Bethlehem supernova, RCW 86, the oldest known supernova in recorded history, was seen by Chinese astronomers in 185 AD. For centuries, astronomers have looked to the historical record in search of evidence for what could explain this Star of Bethlehem. Scholars have been discussing potential causes since at least the 13th century. Perhaps it was a supernova, a comet, a solar flare, or an alignment of planets. Or alternatively, maybe it never happened at all. The truth is, science will likely never know the truth. But let's entertain the idea that it was a real celestial event. What are some science-backed explanations that could explain the Star of Bethlehem? Well, the story is relatively vague, but it does give us some clues. Some things are easily ruled out. For example, the Star of Bethlehem couldn't have been a meteor, a chunk of space rock that brightly burns up in Earth's atmosphere, which would have appeared and faded in an instant. There's no way three wise men could have tracked a meteor for weeks. It's also unlikely that a supernova, the explosive death of a star, which drastically increases its brightness for days, weeks, or months, could explain the Star of Bethlehem. Supernovae, or guest stars, have been consistently witnessed and recorded going back thousands of years. So if one had happened, other cultures likely would have taken note. And even if it somehow escaped the written historical record, astronomers have observed remnants of many other ancient supernovae, and by estimating their peak brightness, researchers have even tied some remnants to events seen on Earth in the past. Yet telescopes haven't found any evidence for a supernova remnant that syncs up with the timing of the Star of Bethlehem. In fact, the only supernova that was visible from Earth around the time of Christ's birth actually happened in the year 185 AD and was recorded by Chinese astronomers. Italian painter Giotto di Bondone witnessed Halley's comet, when it appeared in 1301 AD. Then he painted the Star of Bethlehem as a comet burning bright above Jesus in the manger. Was it a comet after all? In the past, some interested astronomers have also suggested the Star of Bethlehem was a comet passing near Earth. These icy bodies from the distant solar system often shine quite brightly when they venture into the inner solar system and are heated by the sun. They're also known for sometimes visibly lingering in the sky for weeks or months at a time. And like supernovae, we also have historical records from other cultures regarding comets. Sure enough, in the year 5 BC, Chinese astronomers noted the appearance of a broom star that many researchers have interpreted as a comet. Like supernovae, Chinese scholars noted many historic comets and even recorded a number of times that meteor impacts killed people. In the 1970s, researchers caught onto the timing coincidence of this Chinese broom star, and a string of papers started popping up in scientific journals debating the idea among other inspirations. All the back and forth culminated in a 1977 story in the New York Times written by legendary science journalist Walter Sullivan that suggested it could have been a comet, conjunction, nova, or simply myth. Clearly, no consensus opinion has emerged in the decades since either. So could a comet have been the Star of Bethlehem? There's no way to rule it out, but there is one obvious reason to doubt it. Keep in mind that people in the ancient world typically saw comets as symbols of pending doom, an evil omen of bad things about to happen. So, if a comet suddenly started shining brightly in the night sky, it's hard to imagine 3 wise men would interpret it as a sign that their savior had finally been born. A triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn occurred in 7 BC. At first glance, these illustrations look the same, but compare the positions of the planets with the background stars. On May 29th, Jupiter passed Saturn, both moving right to left for the first time. Jupiter passed Saturn again September 30th, with both moving to the right, west. Finally, the planets resumed eastward motion, and Jupiter passed Saturn for the 3rd time on December 5th. Ancient Great Conjunction. What about a mashup of planets, like the Great Conjunction of 2020? Could that explain the Star of Bethlehem? When you rewind the motion of the planets, something that's easy to do with observing software these days, you can see that several interesting conjunctions played out in the years around the life of Jesus. A planetary conjunction happens when 2 planets make a close approach to each other in Earth's night sky. The 2 objects aren't actually near each other, though. They just look that way from our vantage point. In the year 7 BC, Jupiter and Saturn had 3 conjunctions in the same constellation, Pisces. Because the planets move in their orbits at different speeds and are located at different distances, sometimes they appear to pass one another in the night sky. They can also appear to hold still or move backward in the sky, which astronomers call retrograde motion. This trick is like passing a slower car on the highway. As you get close to the other vehicle, it seems to hold still beside you. Then, as you pull away, it drops backward. The same thing happens as Earth zips around the Sun much faster than the outer planets. However, Jupiter is closer to the Sun than Saturn, so it also appears to move faster in our night sky. So, if Jupiter and Saturn had 3 close conjunctions in a relatively brief period of time, it's easy to imagine that ancient astronomers, really astrologers, would have taken note. And they also likely would have ascribed some meaning to the event. These same astrologers wouldn't have had to wait long for an even more striking planetary encounter. 4 years later, in the summer of 3 BC, Jupiter and Venus met in an event that would have looked much like the Christmas star, also referred to as the Great Conjunction of December 2020. On the morning of August 12th in 3 BC, Jupiter and Venus would have sat just 1/10 of a degree apart in the dawn sky. That's 1/5 the diameter of the full moon. The December 2020 conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn had an identical separation, albeit in the evening sky. That wasn't the end of the show either. Venus and Jupiter continued their dance over most of the next year before finally appearing to merge into a single star in June. Though not perfect, your hand, with your arm fully outstretched, is a great tool for estimating angles in the night sky. Credit: the conversation. The idea that a conjunction between bright planets could explain the Star of Bethlehem isn't new. A note in the annals of the Abbey of Worcester from 1285 AD points out an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn that happened at the time of Jesus' birth. And Johannes Kepler himself touched on the idea in the 17th century. Myth or reality? Since then, many enthusiastic astronomers and eager amateurs have also pointed to other celestial positions playing out around the same time as further evidence that ancient astrologers would have found meaning in these events. Bright stars and planets were moving through important constellations. Still others have suggested that the Star of Bethlehem might not have been one celestial event at all. Instead, taken together, the combined effect of years of these astronomical events may have led the Magi to see signs a new king had been born. But could any of these things have really caused the Star of Bethlehem? The truth is, none of these events match up perfectly with the description of how things played out in the book of Matthew. The context is also off. Ancient people knew their planets well, so it would be weird to call a conjunction of multiple planets a star. Furthermore, it's hard to imagine how Herod could be surprised by 3 wise men telling him about a new star. He surely would have seen any such bright or obvious object himself. According to the Bible, astrology is also heretical, which makes the idea of reading into the meaning of the stars a bit suspect in the first place. Which means the Star of Bethlehem may not have been a real-time event, but a coded message for ancient readers. The Magi were not kings. Forget gold crowns and Christmas carols. The Magi weren't kings. They were Persian priests, likely Zoroastrians, trained astrologers who studied the skies for signs of world-changing births. These were political agents, not just wise men. Biblical account. Traditional nativity scenes depict 3 wise men visiting the infant Jesus on the night of his birth, in a manger accompanied by the shepherds and angels. But this should be understood as an artistic convention, allowing the 2 separate scenes of the adoration of the shepherds on the birth night and the later adoration of the Magi to be combined for convenience. The single biblical account in Matthew 2 simply presents an event at an unspecified point after Jesus' birth, in which an unnumbered party of unnamed wise men, magoi, visits him in a house, oikion, not a stable. Description of the Magi: they were not kings. The Magi are popularly referred to as wise men and kings. The word magi is the plural of Latin magus, borrowed from Greek magos, as used in the original Greek text of the Gospel of Matthew, in the plural magoi. The Greek magos itself is derived from Old Persian magus, which in turn originated from the Avestan maguno, referring to the Iranian priestly caste of Zoroastrianism. Within this tradition, priests paid particular attention to the stars and gained an international reputation for astrology, which was at that time highly regarded as a science. Their religious practices and astrological abilities caused derivatives of the term magi to be applied to the occult in general and led to the English term magic. The King James Version translates magi as wise men. The same translation is applied to the wise men led by Daniel of earlier Hebrew scriptures, Daniel 2:48. Although the Magi are commonly referred to as kings, there is nothing in the Gospel of Matthew that implies they were rulers of any kind. The identification of the Magi as kings is linked to Old Testament prophecies that describe the Messiah being worshipped by kings in Isaiah 63, Psalm 68:29, and Psalm 72:10, which reads, "Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, all nations serve him." Early readers reinterpreted Matthew in light of these prophecies and elevated the Magi to kings, which became widely accepted by at least 500 AD. Later, Christian interpretation stressed the adoration of the Magi and shepherds as the first recognition by humans of Christ as the Redeemer. Identities and background. The names and origins of the Magi are never given in Scripture, but have been provided by various traditions and legends. Among Western Christians, the earliest and most common names are Melchior, Caspar, Balthasar. These names first appear in an 8th century religious chronicle, Excerpta Latina Barbari, which is a Latin translation of a lost Greek manuscript probably composed in Alexandria roughly 2 centuries earlier. Another 8th century text, Collectanea et Flores, which was likewise a Latin translation from an original Greek account, continues the tradition of 3 kings and their names and gives additional details. Many Chinese Christians believe that one of the Magi came from China. Country of origin and journey. The phrase "from the east," apo Anatolon, apo Anatolon, more literally, "from the rising of the sun," is the only information Matthew provides about the region from which they came. The Parthian Empire, centered in Iran, Persia, stretched from eastern Syria to the fringes of India. Though the empire was tolerant of other religions, its dominant religion was Zoroastrianism, with its priestly Magos class. Although Matthew's account does not explicitly cite the motivation for their journey other than seeing the star in the east, which they took to be the star of the King of the Jews, the apocryphal Syriac infancy gospel states in its 3rd chapter that they were pursuing a prophecy from their prophet Zaradasht, Zoroaster. There was a tradition that the Central Asian Naimans and their Christian relatives, the Karaites, were descended from the biblical Magi. This heritage passed to the Mongol dynasty of Genghis Khan when Sorghaghtani, niece of the Karaite ruler Togrul, married Tolui, the youngest son of Genghis, and became the mother of Mongke Khan and his younger brother and successor, Kublai Khan. Togrul became identified with the legendary Central Asian Christian king Prester John, whose Mongol descendants were sought as allies against the Muslims by contemporary European monarchs and popes. Characters of the Magi. Apart from their names, the 3 Magi developed distinct characteristics in Christian tradition, so that between them they represented the 3 ages of adult man, 3 geographical and cultural areas, and sometimes other concepts. In one tradition, reflected in art by at least the 14th century, for example in the Arena Chapel by Giotto in 1305, Caspar is old, normally with a white beard, and gives the gold. He is king of Tarsus, land of merchants, on the Mediterranean coast of modern Turkey, and is first in line to kneel to Christ. Melchior is middle-aged, giving frankincense from Arabia, and Balthasar is a young man, very often and increasingly black-skinned, with myrrh from Saba, modern southern Yemen. Their ages were often given as 60, 40, and 20 respectively, and their geographical origins were rather variable, with Balthasar increasingly coming from Aksum or other parts of Africa and being represented accordingly. Balthasar's blackness has been the subject of considerable recent scholarly attention. In art, it is found mostly in Northern Europe, beginning from the 12th century, and becoming very common in the north by the 15th. The subject of which king is which and who brought which gift is not without some variation depending on the tradition. Gifts of the Magi. 3 gifts are explicitly identified in Matthew: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. There are various theories and interpretations of the meaning and symbolism of the gifts, particularly with respect to frankincense and myrrh. The theories generally break down into 2 groups. All 3 gifts are ordinary offerings and gifts given to a king. Myrrh being commonly used as an anointing oil, frankincense as a perfume, and gold as a valuable. The 3 gifts had a spiritual meaning: gold as a symbol of kingship on earth, frankincense and incense as a symbol of deity, and myrrh, an embalming oil, as a symbol of death. Frankincense and myrrh were burned during rituals among Egyptian, Greek, and Roman societies. Ancient Egyptians used myrrh to embalm corpses, and Romans burned it as a type of incense at funeral pyres. Myrrh was used as an embalming ointment and as a penitential incense in funerals and cremations until the 15th century. The holy oil traditionally used by the Eastern Orthodox Church for performing the sacraments of chrismation and function is traditionally scented with myrrh, and receiving either of these sacraments is commonly referred to as receiving the myrrh. It has been suggested by scholars that the gifts were medicinal rather than precious material for tribute. What subsequently happened to these gifts is never mentioned in the scripture, but several traditions have developed. One story has the gold being stolen by the two thieves who were later crucified alongside Jesus. Another tale has it being entrusted to and then misappropriated by Judas. One tradition suggests that Joseph and Mary used the gold to finance their travels when they fled Bethlehem after an angel had warned in a dream about King Herod's plan to kill Jesus. And another story proposes the theory that the myrrh given to them at Jesus' birth was used to anoint Jesus' body after his crucifixion. There was a 15th century golden case, purportedly containing the gift of the Magi, housed in the monastery of St. Paul of Mount Athos. It was donated to the monastery in the 15th century by Mara Branković, daughter of the King of Serbia Đurđ Branković, wife to the Ottoman Sultan Murat II, and godmother to Mehmet II, the conqueror of Constantinople. After the Athens earthquake of September 7, 1999, they were temporarily displayed in Athens to strengthen faith and raise money for earthquake victims. The relics were displayed in Ukraine and Belarus in Christmas of 2014, and thus left Greece for the first time since the 15th century. Astronomical clues the Church ignored. The Church emphasized faith over astronomy. But ancient skies told a different story. Between 12 and 2 BCE, the skies lit up with Halley's Comet, 12 BCE. Between 1935 and 1959, Haydn's very first Zeiss projector, 3 others have been installed since, was run back some 2,000 years in an attempt to reproduce the positions of the planets around the time of the birth of Christ. The entire procedure would take 4 hours, with the planets engaged in an incredible fast-moving dance, while the moon flipped around the sky 100 times a minute. Ultimately, the projector was brought to a halt on February 25 in the year 6 BC, with the planets Jupiter, Saturn and Mars forming a triangle low in the western sky. There are many other contributing factors to this age-old story, including the uncertainty in the actual date of Christ's birth and the terminology used to describe celestial events during the star's appearance some 20 centuries ago. For instance, any heavenly object bright enough to attract attention was apt to be called a star. Meteors, for instance, were shooting or falling stars. Comets were hairy stars. Novas were new stars, and planets were wandering stars. The Bible says nothing about the calendar date of the Nativity, but does refer to historical personages and events, such as the reign of King Herod. Modern historical research suggests that Herod may have died sometime between 4 BC and 1 BC by our present calendar. The Magi are said to have visited Herod just before he died, and presumably the birth of Christ and the first appearance of the fabled star came sometime before that. And it is very doubtful that Jesus was born in late December. In ancient times, December 25 was the date of the lavish Roman festival of Saturnalia. It was a time when gifts were exchanged, homes, streets, and buildings were decorated. People came home for the holidays, and everybody was in a happy party mood. It has been said that early Christians chose the date of the Saturnalia in order to avoid attention and thus escape persecution. When the Roman Emperor Constantine officially adopted Christianity in the 4th century, the date of Christmas remained December 25. The modern calendars have 2 major errors, and Christ's birth almost certainly did not occur 2011 years ago. Our present chronology, by which the years are numbered as AD or BC, was conceived by the Roman abbot Dionysius Exiguus around 523 AD. Unfortunately, Dionysius made two significant errors in his calculations. The first was his placement of 1 AD immediately following 1 BC, completely disregarding the mathematically required 0 in between. Back then in Europe, 0 was not considered a number. So, for instance, the year we now call 3 BC is actually -2, numerically speaking. Second, Dionysius accepted the statement of Clement of Alexandria that Jesus was born in the 28th year of the reign of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. But Dionysius failed to realize that during the first 4 years of his reign, this Roman ruler was known by his original name, Octavianus, until the Roman Senate proclaimed him as Augustus. So here alone we have an error of 4 years, but by the time it was realized, our chronology was too well entrenched to be changed. As for the time for the appearance of the star, most astronomers and biblical scholars believe that it most likely occurred sometime between the years 7 and 2 BC. So this is the time frame that we need to explore to determine if there was anything unusual in the sky that might have caught the attention of the Magi. What might the star have been? Not so easily dismissed, however, is the possibility that the star was a bright comet. Such objects can remain visible to the unaided eye for weeks, either in the pre-dawn sky or at dusk. Surely it is not impossible to conceive that a comet with a bright star-like head and long gossamer tail pointing like some cosmic finger toward the horizon could have drawn the Magi to Bethlehem. The famous Halley's Comet, last seen in early 1986, flared in the sky during August and September in the year 11 BC. However, most authorities dismiss it due to the poor time fit. Perhaps the simplest answer is a nova or supernova outburst. A new star blazes forth where none had ever been seen and leaves no trace for us to find in the future. Although their names imply a new creation, these spectacular objects are in reality dying stars, although they are new, albeit temporary, additions to the nighttime sky. The appearance of a nova is unpredictable. A really bright one becomes visible perhaps once every 20 years or so. Going on this assumption, we're due for a bright, naked-eye nova at almost any time now, since the most recent one appeared in August 1975, not far from the bright star Deneb in the constellation Cygnus. Even more spectacular, but much rarer, are supernovae, stars that suddenly blow themselves see between 1935 and 1959. Hayden's very first Zeiss projector, 3 others have been installed since, was run back some 2,000 years in an attempt to reproduce the positions of the planets around the time of the birth of Christ. The entire procedure would take 4 hours with the planets engaged in an incredible fast-moving dance while the moon flipped around the sky 100 times a minute. Ultimately, the projector was brought to a halt on February 25 in the year 6 BC, with the planets Jupiter, Saturn and Mars forming a triangle low in the western sky. There are many other contributing factors to this age-old story, including the uncertainty in the actual date of Christ's birth and the terminology used to describe celestial events during the star's appearance some 20 centuries ago. For instance, any heavenly object bright enough to attract attention was apt to be called a star. Meteors, for instance, were shooting or falling stars, comets were hairy stars, novas were new stars, and planets were wandering stars. The Bible says nothing about the calendar date of the Nativity, but does refer to historical personages and events, such as the reign of King Herod. Modern historical research suggests that Herod may have died sometime between 4 BC and 1 BC by our present calendar. The Magi are said to have visited Herod just before he died, and presumably the birth of Christ and the first appearance of the fabled star came sometime before that. And it is very doubtful that Jesus was born in late December. In ancient times, December 25 was the date of the lavish Roman festival of Saturnalia. It was a time when gifts were exchanged, homes, streets, and buildings were decorated. People came home for the holidays and everybody was in a happy party mood. It has been said that early Christians chose the date of the Saturnalia in order to avoid attention and thus escape persecution. When the Roman Emperor Constantine officially adopted Christianity in the 4th century, the date of Christmas remained December 25. Our modern calendars have huge errors, and Christ's birth almost certainly did not occur 2011 years ago. Our present chronology, by which the years are numbered as AD or BC, was conceived by the Roman abbot Dionysius Exiguus around 523 AD. Unfortunately, Dionysius made two significant errors in his calculations. The first was his placement of 1 AD immediately following 1 BC, completely disregarding the mathematically required 0 in between. Back then in Europe, 0 was not considered a number. So, for instance, the year we now call 3 BC is actually -2, numerically speaking. Second, Dionysius accepted the statement of Clement of Alexandria that Jesus was born in the 28th year of the reign of the Roman Emperor Caesar Augustus. But Dionysius failed to realize that during the first 4 years of his reign, this Roman ruler was known by his original name Octavianus, until the Roman Senate proclaimed him as Augustus. So here alone, we have an error of 4 years. But by the time it was realized, our chronology was too well entrenched to be changed. As for the time for the appearance of the star, most astronomers and biblical scholars believe that it most likely occurred sometime between the years 7 and 2 BC. So this is the time frame that we need to explore to determine if there was anything unusual in the sky that might have caught the attention of the Magi. What might the star have been? The famous Halley's Comet, last seen in early 1986, flared in the sky during August and September in the year 11 BC. However, most authorities dismiss it due to the poor time fit. Although it seems unlikely that another great comet could have appeared nearer to the accepted time frame of the star's appearance and went unrecorded, we can never really be sure. Besides, comets were viewed as omens of evil, such as floods and famine, as well as the death, not the birth, of kings and monarchs. The Romans, in marking the death of the Roman general Agrippa, for example, used the 11 BC apparition of Halley's Comet as a benchmark. With this in mind, comets would seem to be wrong as the heavenly sign that would signal the coming of a newborn king. Was it supernova after all? Perhaps the simplest answer is a nova or supernova outburst. A new star blazes forth where none had ever been seen and leaves no trace for us to find in the future. Although their names imply a new creation, these spectacular objects are in reality dying stars, although they are new, albeit temporary, additions to the nighttime sky. The appearance of a nova is unpredictable. A really bright one becomes visible perhaps once every 20 years or so. Going on this assumption, we're due for a bright naked-eye nova at almost any time now, since the most recent one appeared in August 1975 not far from the bright star Deneb in the constellation Cygnus. Most bright novas suddenly and unexpectedly flare into prominence literally overnight, attracting the instant attention of sky-conscious people. But after several days or weeks of such prominence, it gradually fades back to obscurity. Even more spectacular, but much rarer, are supernova, stars that suddenly blow themselves completely apart, briefly producing an incredible energy output equivalent to the combined light of an entire galaxy of stars. Although a nova or supernova is the most satisfying explanation for the star, there is a serious problem with it, in that there doesn't seem to be any definitive record of a bright nova appearing in the sky during the time that biblical historians believe the Magi made their journey. One nova apparently did appear, bordering the constellations Capricornus and Aquarius during the spring of 5 BC. But the Chinese records, which describe this object, imply that it was apparently not very conspicuous at all. planet peregrinations. The final possibility is one or more of the bright naked-eye planets. The likelihood that the Magi could have confused one or more of the familiar planets with a star seems remote. However, sometimes two or more of these restless wanderers come together in a striking conjunction. Perhaps a planetary grouping of particular beauty, an exceptionally close conjunction of two planets, or groupings of three or more creating an eye-catching geometric figure in the sky may have taken place between the years 7 and 2 BC. Such a gathering would be quite unusual to say the least. One such event that we've already mentioned occurred in 6 BC involving Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, and happened in the constellation of Pisces, the fishes. Yet another possible explanation for the Star of Bethlehem is the 3 times passing of Jupiter and Saturn between May and December in 7 BC, a rare triple or great conjunction. Jupiter appeared to pass 1 degree north of Saturn on May 29th, practically the same on September 30, then finally a 3rd time on December 5. There is no doubt about the visibility of these events, mostly opposite to the Sun in nighttime skies. As for their astrological impact, the Magi would have certainly noticed that both planets did not appear to separate widely between their conjunctions. In fact, for 8 consecutive months, the time it might have taken to travel the 500 miles or more from Babylonia to Judea, Jupiter and Saturn remained within 3 degrees of each other, from late April of 7 BC until early January of 6 BC. But perhaps no other planetary grouping can equal that of the 2 brightest planets, Venus and Jupiter, for the explanation that we seek. And if we take the only known account of the star given in St. Matthew, then what we really need is the appearance of not just 1, but 2 stars. The first appearance would have been seen well in advance of the Magi's arrival in Bethlehem, and the other at the end of their long journey. These weren't myths. These were logged observations across civilizations from all around the world. Forgotten prophecies of Balaam. Balaam, son of Beor from Pethor in Aram, Deuteronomy 23:4, was a powerful and famous diviner in the ancient world. He was an Arab from a town near the Euphrates. Not only is he mentioned in the Old Testament, but a fragmentary plaster inscription about him was found in 1967 at Deir Allah, Jordan, 25 miles north of the plains of Moab, where the Israelites had camped. The inscription, written in black and red ink on a plaster wall, dates to circa 800 BC. The long inscription begins, "The misfortunes of the book of Balaam, son of Beor." A divine seer was he. The Arab Balaam was also a descendant of Abraham through his son Ishmael. He had been summoned by Balak, king of the Moabites, descendants of Noah, to curse the Israelites who were conquering the land of Canaan. The Hebrews, lean and hungry for land, had emerged from their 40 years in the wilderness, a disciplined and invincible force. Balaam, tempted by the money King Balak had offered him, tried to utter curses on the Jews, but could not. An angel barred Balaam's way, and even his own donkey tried to stop him from cursing the Israelites. Numbers 22:21-39. In spite of being paid to curse the Jews, Balaam could only pronounce praises upon them. Numbers 23-24. In one of Balaam's prophecies he says, "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel." Numbers 24:17. So it basically means that Balaam, even earlier than Prophet Matthew, indicated the Star of Bethlehem. Balaam and his star appear several times in the catacomb of Peter and Marcellinus, in the catacomb of Priscilla, and in the catacomb of St. Sebastian. In Priscilla catacomb, a plaster sarcophagus slab from the 200s covered the tomb of one Severa. It depicts Mary and the toddler Jesus sitting on a chair with Balaam behind them, pointing to his star in the sky. In front of the mother and child are 3 men with arms and hands outstretched toward the toddler, rushing with scarves blowing in the wind to present their gifts to young Jesus whose arms are reaching out to them. This representation is crude, but the sculptor has caught the eagerness of the Magi to deliver the gifts to Jesus and the excitement of the little boy Jesus. Of great importance to the catacomb Christians was that God used the sinful and Gentile Balaam to foretell not only Christ's birth but to specify the star the Magi would follow to worship it. But what is bringing concern is that prophecy was also used in the Dead Sea Scrolls to describe a military Messiah, not a peaceful one. The Star of Bethlehem isn't just a religious story. It's a collision of astronomy, politics, theology, and myth-making. It may have been real. It may have been symbolic. It may have been something we still don't understand. But the truth lies not just in the sky. It lies in who controls the story of the sky. Think this star was more than a star? Drop your theory in the comments. Like this video? Then don't miss our recent videos about Kalki Avatar and Jacob's Ladder. Subscribe, hit the bell, keep questioning.